The Emancipation Proclamation, and we're talking to Dr. Revis Mitchell from Fisk University. And of course, Dr. Mitchell, during this last 5.5 or 6 minutes that we have during this show, let's see if we might be able to sort of wrap up the Emancipation Proclamation and to give you an opportunity to point out to the audience this morning about how significant that document was, and et cetera. So start wherever you wish.
Let's put it in historical context.
Good.
Lincoln needed men to fight the war. Additionally, Lincoln needed to move the war effort from simply a struggle between northern and southern economies as leaders. He needed to move it to higher ground. He needed soldiers desperately. He needed soldiers desperately. But one of the tenets of the Western world is you can't take a slave and have him fight a free man's war. The Congress had already passed the Confiscation Act, which would allow the seizing of southern property. Well, under the context, slaves were considered property. But Lincoln wanted to force the hand. He didn't want this war to remain bloody. He thought if he threatened to free the slaves, the southern states would return to the Union.
And another compromise.
And another compromise, exactly. Time is marching on. In June of that year, the Congress had ended slavery in the District of Columbia. In August, the Congress will outlaw slavery in the territories. Now, Lincoln's also a man of vision and a politician. He wants to be, have the great place in history. Lincoln informs the South in September of 1863 after the Battle of Antietam. You need a victory to announce a policy change or whatever. It wasn't a major victory, but the South claimed victory. After the Battle of Antietam, he announced that if those states had not returned by January 1, 1863, their slaves would be free and the black men would be available for the Union Army.
So this was no real surprise that President Lincoln had simply decided to spring on the South all of a sudden about the use. He gave them, what, a three-month
window of opportunity. And I think that it should be remembered at that point for American history that what Lincoln was really trying to do was end the war and save lives. Now, not to despair a great president's image, but this was not an act of contrition, not an act of love towards the African American. Lincoln, if you read his biographies, he never thought that blacks and whites were equal. He would accept freedom, but never the equality of the black man. But this, again, is a valiant effort to end that war and to put the Union back together. January 1, 1863, Lincoln's informed that none of the southern states have responded to his direct desire. Now, it's interesting also about the document, it only freed those slaves in states that were in rebellion against the Union. It didn't free any slaves in Maryland. It didn't free any slaves in Delaware, and Delaware was a slaveholding state. And it didn't free any slaves in Tennessee, because Tennessee would already be back in the Union under military governor Andrew Johnson. So it's a direct act to bring about military action. After the proclamation, Lincoln does begin to raise African-American troops. The Sea Island in South Carolina, Parris Island. Lincoln writes to his wife, the mere sight of 50,000 armed and drilled black soldiers on the banks of the Mississippi should end this rebellion immediately. Today, historically, you place that in the context of the motion picture Glory, that most people are familiar with, the 369. We look at here in Tennessee, the Battle of Nashville, won by African-American soldiers. So Lincoln had every right to believe that blacks would fight valiantly. Some people question that. The war will end, and the 13th and 14th Amendments provide freedom and citizenship. But Lincoln took a bold step. I think it's interesting in summation to look at what outsiders say. And the London Spectator, the day after the proclamation was, after Lincoln was informed that none of the southern states had returned, the London Spectator made the following comment. It's not that one American can't own another American in America. It's that they can't own an American unless they're loyal to America in America. So the whole question of loyalty, the whole emotional question of slavery, and the Civil War was a very emotional war. It's emotional for black folk, too. You know, you're suddenly going to end slavery. Many persons who were enslaved had never known freedom. They'd never known anyone who had known freedom. They had been enslaved for 3 and 4 generations. No one, and so this freedom was a desired commodity. We celebrate Lincoln, though, because he maintained the Union where that freedom would finally be realized. And there's really no better place to live than the United States of America.
Very good. And I can certainly echo that statement to Dr. Mitchell. Let me thank you, Dr. Mitchell, in reference to this, because I think that in many instances we hear about the Emancipation Proclamation, and I think one of the things that many of our young people need, of course not only young people, but many people need to know is how we got to where we are and the part that has been played by many people in American history.
And we need to give a correct adaptation of the contribution, not a false recommendation. Some people say Lincoln should be remembered as the man who freed the slaves. I argue Lincoln should be remembered as the man who saved the Union.
And very good. And of course, in saving the Union, he eventually freed the slave. And I guess in a real sense, as many black folks said during his period, that he is, quote, the great emancipator. And I think that if there's a person who should wear that mantle, I think that Mr. Lincoln certainly should. Because even though others had an opportunity to say something about it, nobody said anything about it. And he at least made a move toward
and certainly at the end of that great war, great action was necessary. The war might not have been fought to free the slaves, but the great outcome was freedom.
Freedom for the slave, and that made it a great war.
And
of course, let me thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.